Hello, welcome to another live Google Hangout on a Living Income Guaranteed. And today we have decided that to close this year, it was about time that we bring through a discussion that has been in the headlines, in the media throughout most of this year, which is all about the refugee crisis. And we have entitled this The Refugee Crisis, an Insider Perspective. We have decided to do this because we have noticed that there tends to be a bias or a sense of just placing information for particular purposes in the media without interviewing people that are precisely in the countries in Europe that are witnessing this process unfold. We know that two of the main countries that have this kind of open arms policy and places that are one of the main aims or objectives to get to from the refugees is Germany and Sweden. So today we are going to be having two of our guests from both countries discussing their own experience in terms of being in those countries, being immigrants themselves as well. And so without further ado, I'd like to introduce to Agnieszka Lewandowski. So thank you for being in the Hangout. Welcome from Germany.
Hello, it's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you for joining us. And also from Sweden, a well-known person, Anna Brix Thomsen. Welcome, Anna.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me on.
Thank you for being here as well. So, Aga, can you also mute yourself, because I'm getting feedback. I'm listening to myself, or if you can get some headphones, because I'm getting the repetition, please.
I have headphones here, so I will try it.
Yeah, cool. So to our viewers, please remember that there is questions, comments that are available throughout the duration of this live hangout, which will be about at least 40 minutes. This is going to be quite a subject because our guests have a lot to say, of course, with regards to this, and I'm sure that you also want to ask them and have more of a commonsensical perspective on this subject, considering that our guests are part of the Equal Life Foundation. So, and also, if you're watching the YouTube repetition, please make sure that you place your comments, questions in the comment section. We will ensure that Aga and Anna get to the questions. So let's start with each one of you sharing about your particular position and your perspective in relation to being in Sweden, in Germany, in relation to this refugee process unfolding. So let's start with you, Aga, if you'd like to start and share with us.
So what do you want to know? How is it for me to be a refugee, or about the situation?
Yes, you are definitely a person that can share from your own experience being a refugee, not a refugee, an immigrant in Germany from a long time ago. So if you can share us that experience and a little bit now of how you see the refugee crisis.
So my personal story, I don't know, I'm not switching into the screen. I see you. But I will continue. So I came to Germany 25 years ago. It was my mother who made that decision, and it was based on an economic decision. My mother wanted to have a better life for herself and us children. She was a single parent, and there was this, you can say, chance for some people, and I just saw a question, so therefore I was disturbed. And so my mother decided to take the chance, and I personally, I was 12, and in a way it was a big chance for me, and I still see it as me having the luck or the chance to do so. My life would definitely be another one if I stayed in Poland. And when I now follow the crisis, how it's developing, what I see is, because I have my personal experience, I see people, individuals. So I, in a way, feel with each individual, because in the media you often have this view on things like, statistically people are moving, and through my personal experience, I always see more the individual family, the individual being, what they go through. And yeah, we will continue on this hangout to speak about it in detail, but that's for now.
Sure, thanks for sharing your context. And Anna, also yourself in Sweden, your current experience toward this refugee crisis, what you're witnessing, so to speak, in the streets, in your job as well, if you can also introduce ourselves to your direct contact with some of the refugees.
Yeah, sure. First, I would like to say that I consider myself to be sort of a luxury migrant or a privileged migrant, because I moved from one country in Europe to another country in Europe, or from one rich country to another rich country, and it was like the smoothest thing ever. I didn't have to prove anything. I didn't have to show anything. It was like moving to another city, basically. And I found that to be quite interesting and surprising, because I always thought that moving to another country would be filled with a lot of paperwork and be very difficult. But I suppose that is more when you move from a more poor country to a richer country. So that in itself is quite interesting. But of course, I've had that personal experience of having to learn a new language and live in a new culture. And even though, you know, I moved from Denmark, which is the neighboring country, to Sweden, and the cultures are very similar. But even with that, there are stark differences. And it's what I've seen is that it's a very long process to learn to integrate yourself into a new culture and understand how that culture works. Like, it works because as children, when you grow up in a culture, you kind of learn everything sort of subconsciously, right? You're not aware of all the customs and the way that certain words are used. You just learn it. But when you're an adult, for example, or maybe a teenager as well, you have to kind of learn it very consciously. Oh, so they use this word then, or they do this custom then. And I see that it can take years. I've lived here now for 4 years, and it still feels very new to me. So I can only imagine, like Aga said, how it is like for people who come from completely different cultures. But then also in November, I started working here in Sweden with unaccompanied refugee children. So this is something that is very big, particularly here in Sweden. And my perspective on that is that people these are primarily certain African countries, Eritrea, Sudan, Somalia. And then it is certain countries where they've had wars, Iraq, Iran, and Afghanistan, where parents will send their children, boys specifically from the ages of 12 to 18, and they will send them virtually alone through the earth, through the world, to seek asylum in countries like Sweden. And I think they do that in Sweden because they've heard that it is safe, and that they will be taken care of. There will be protection for them here. And so I work with a group of boys, primarily from Afghanistan, but also from other countries. But then at the same time, we have here in Sweden and in Europe in general, we have this, as you said, this refugee crisis, which basically means, it's kind of interesting when you were saying it, I was kind of reflecting on it, because it's really a crisis for them. You know, it's a crisis for the refugees, it's a crisis for the Syrian people. Their life is in total crisis, but then we also call it a crisis that they are coming so many. I think that's really the main part of it, why we are considering it a crisis for us here, because our infrastructure is obviously not set up to handle thousands and thousands of people. Sweden is a country with 9 million inhabitants, And just in the last year alone, maybe even in the last 6 months, over 25,000 children, registered children, has come, and that's just the children, right? It's not even accounting for the adults or the people that doesn't register with the government. So we're seeing like a mass influx in refugees and immigrants as well, and that is then considered a crisis. And of course, it's like the main point of conversation in the homes and in the media. How are we going to handle this all? And for example, here in Sweden and in Denmark as well, what we're seeing politically is that the far right nationalist parties, the last 5 to 10 years, they've just gone up and up and up in the ratings, and the more sort of social democratic parties that previously was very open to immigrants and refugees, they've become increasingly more right-winged, political. So that's what we're seeing. And of course, we're also seeing it in our, it makes a big difference in a country as ours, where you're used to seeing, your Swedish neighbors, and then all of a sudden you see more and more people that look different and that have, for example, the scarves on or the hijabs, and we have a lot of beggars as well. These are primarily Romas. The Roma people, they sit in front of all the supermarkets, and this has happened like in a matter of very few years. Like it's this explosion suddenly that happened, and now the country and the people and the economy has to kind of reset itself. Like, so how are we gonna? And that's like I think that's the main thing that's going on right now, is that everyone, both within themselves and together, are like, how are we gonna deal with it? How do we, like, who are we in relation to this? And I find that very interesting.
And that's part of what we constantly see, that there's like a division. Of course, in the media, we see the pro-refugees people handling these kind of messages. We welcome the refugees, handing them food, supporting them. And then there's obviously this far-right process that is been opening up not only in Sweden, but generally in Europe. So I'd like to also have your perspective, Aga, on this, on Germany. We have things like Pegida and many protests that are going on. So share with us about it, because we tend to see this in the media, but if is that really what's happening on the ground? Is this like a common sentiment as well, or not?
So how I see the media in general, it's very polarized. It's like black and white. So you have those reports that are just pretty, that are showing that everything is functioning, but in a way, it is so. There are communities that are dealing with the problems very well, and it's just like, everything's beautiful, and then you have the other reports that are just negative and that show only the negative side. And so all the people are like, it's just black or white.
And in terms of Pegida and these protests that happen, there's also like the anti-Pegida type of groups.
Yeah.
So what is the sentiment in general between people? I mean, is there a way through to get through them in terms of just being pro or anti and get to some kind of common sense? Do you see that as possible?
What I see in Pegida is a really deep-rooted fear. It's a fear, and it's not mainly about that it is too much. It is too much, but within Pegida there is this like a fear that this crisis is an organized invasion. That someone, it has like a conspiracy thing to it, that it was planned and organized to invade Europe or Germany, to destroy the German or the Western, I don't know, the Christian culture. So it is not easy to get there to a point of common sense.
Also, in terms of the EU, the policies, which is what all the states in the EU had agreed to, what we've been seeing is that many of them are saying, kind of like, no, I'm washing my hands from the problem, I'm crossing borders, and this is what's causing most of the problem as well, while Germany and Sweden are specifically saying we're still welcoming people, though we've also heard that Sweden has crossed its border. So is this true, Anna?
No, well, yeah, well, you could say to a certain extent. What they've done is that because there is a bridge between Denmark and Sweden, so basically, and I've talked to, the boys that I work with, they explain how they go, for example, from Afghanistan, they have like very certain routes that they take to get to Europe, right? And so some, for example, come through Greece. You have a huge problems in Greece as well. Some come through other countries, and then one of the routes is through Germany, and then either some stay in Germany or they go either to Denmark. You can also go directly from Germany to Sweden. And in the beginning, a lot of them were going through Denmark because it's land fast. Otherwise, you have to sail. And the problem was that the Danish government refused to take any. They were being very strict. They were being threatening. And basically, the refugees kept hearing that Denmark is a horrible country. You don't want to stay there. You'll get deported. So none of them, they didn't want to stay there. So rather than, because otherwise it would kind of, the countries would kind of pick up, like Germany would pick up some, and then Denmark would pick up some, and then, but that didn't happen. So all of them were coming from Denmark to Sweden across the bridge by trains or by cars. So what they've done now is that they've issued a border control, which has never been there. Since they opened the EU and since they created the bridge between Denmark and Sweden, you've never had to show your passport or show your identity. And actually, I've taken the train and I've also driven my car over the bridge after they created the border control. And what was so interesting is that when I was driving through the border, they just took a look at me, and then they didn't, it was obviously that it was not for my purpose. They didn't want to check my identity because I didn't look like a refugee in their eyes. And then the same at the train. They will basically, once the train hits the first stop in Sweden, it will stop, and then police or border police will go through the entire train, and if they find any refugees, they will take them out and ship them back to Denmark. Which is in our neck of the woods, it's considered a very radical step. Like, that's very radical. And Sweden, the Swedish government has tried negotiating with the Danish government, and without success, because the Danish government is even more far right at this point. And so they even started threatening closing the bridge, which would be a catastrophe, because so many people are commuting every day between the two countries, which was the whole purpose of creating this bridge in the first place. So, and I think it's not so much a response like we don't want any more refugees, but it's on a pure infrastructure level. Like, it is really a lot. Like, it is, you can feel it, you can see it. It's like becoming its own complete industry in a matter of 6 months, a year, right? So it's happening very, very quickly. So I think that's why they're doing it. But there is still a huge support as well in the Swedish community.
I'd like to get to the point of outrage that is happening and that you kind of opened up in relation to, okay, we are housing all of these people and there's going to be a cost to it. And this is more of like the economic outflow or consequence. So in terms of the amount of money that it is taken to provide for all of these people to ensure their basic living needs and that they're guaranteed and so forth, what's your consideration as, now part of being, in Germany and Sweden, being a taxpayer? What's your perspective on this? Aga, let's start with you.
I was in front of the Hangout researching the point a little bit, and I found out that the federal states, Germany is a federal state country, they calculate like 6,000 to 12,000 per asylum seeker. So they get the money from the national government. So there is, it seems to be so that Germany is in fact a very, very rich country. They can say what they want. There is a massive money available compared to other countries. So it's just about what do we do with that? You know, we planned to do this, but now we have this crisis, and now we have to put some. It's billions, you know. It's we have to put some money. But when you look, for example, at the bailouts, and those are amounts of, I don't know, it's billions and trillions. But when it comes to a crisis like the refugee crisis, but even if you look at the hospitals that needs to be renewed, they are fighting about like 3 million. It's a little bit strange to me, but I don't think it's about money. It's more about really the infrastructure and working hours for the people that have now to work with the refugees, and you have they have to be educated. There are not enough teachers. There are not enough social workers. So it's just like, what do we do now? We have here many refugees, and we have to handle it somewhere. And I don't see the money point in Germany, at least, at really the point issue.
I agree on that perspective, and I know you want to say something, Anna, but I'll just jump in and say the whole point about the bailing out to the banks, it's so true. So money, I fully agree, it cannot really be the problem. It's more of like a willingness to actually even create the money, as we've talked about in these Hangouts many times, to be able to provide for them, and more so like making the infrastructure and the organization work in a way that can handle them as well. What's your take, Anna, and what do you want to add?
No, I just wanted to say that I completely agree with Aga. I have the exact same, like I was thinking the other day, because we hear now how many millions and billions are posted into this, like just like that. And those money, exactly like you're saying it, Aga, is like, where were they before this crisis? Like, because people were, you know, the parties and the municipalities, they were counting pennies, you know, and closing schools. And all of this money, you know, it's just money, it's just flooding. And it's not like they're spending because they have to, just, you know, creating these, like, you know, asylum centers and, oh my God, we have so little money. I have the exact same experience here in Sweden. Oh my God, we are super rich because it's the way that they're spending it as well is like, it's so unpractical, and it's insane, really. Because they're desperate, because they weren't prepared. And so you have all these also probably not very well educated people, and by educated I mean people who weren't educated for this kind of situation, who now has to solve it, because, you know, it's a crisis that no one expected and no one were prepared for. It's not like you have a manual that, you know, the same thing, exact same thing actually happened in the Haiti crisis, where, you know, when they had that big earthquake and lots of money was being donated, but the way it was being handled just made the catastrophe even worse. Like, it wasn't getting to people in the right ways, and we're seeing the same thing now. And so I agree with Aga that it's not about the money.
We have a question from Joku, and he's saying, what is your perspective on how the situation is characterized as refugee crisis, without much mention about how or why so many people are now having to leave their homelands to seek asylum to begin with?
Could I just say one more thing to the other point? So you were talking about, you know, how people now have to work with these people. What I'm also seeing is that it's actually creating an industry where it's putting unemployed people to work. So a lot of people, myself, my mother-in-law, I know a lot of people that are now working in the refugee industry, if you will. So it is actually not necessarily just bad for the economy. And I really fully agree that on a very deep level, the people that are against what is happening, the influx of refugees, it's not because of the money. It cannot be, because the money is clearly there. Yeah, so I just wanted to say that.
And it will stay there because, for example, if they provide them a living income, as we also propose here, they will buy products, services from your country. So it's not like they're going to be sending out that money home, because there's probably no one home left, unless they want to get maybe the women to these places.
And you know what else my brother-in-law told me? I don't know if these figures are right, but he said he had read that within 5 years, all immigrants are in work. And they're really, really particularly successful at creating their own businesses. And that is something that the government really wants. It wants people to create their own businesses because it supports the economy overall. And immigrants are some of the people that are best at doing that. Coming up with like small ideas for small businesses, making it work, putting work into it.
And I see it, so I will add some ideas to it. The money, so in Germany we have something like a living income because you are not left without money. But when you look at the money like Hartz IV, or this money you immediately spend. So the money that the refugees get, it's such a small amount. It's really for the basic needs. This money, you don't save it. You have to buy everything in you what you need. So it's indirectly a push for the economy, and I'm quite sure that the responsible people know of it. It's really like a bailout for the economy in a country, for Germany. And I'm quite sure they are aware of it because Germany has a lot of experience of people coming here. So it made the country, Germany is because it has this input, always the fresh input of migrants.
So on Joku's question, would you like to give a perspective? Who says first?
Well, what I see is that this question of why we don't talk about why people have to leave their home countries. Specifically here, we have something called a Eurocentric perspective. So it's like we see ourselves in Europe as, and in America, you guys do that as well. We see ourselves as the center of the universe, right? So everything starts and ends with us, and we don't really see that the story or the perspective of another person, even when we think we do often. And so and then what we also do not see is that we see kind of black and white, like Aga said earlier, you know, we don't see the individuals or their stories. We kind of see these like very one-dimensional images. You know, there's a war in Syria and people are fleeing, right? Or the Africans, they want to make money. Like it's very one-dimensional, and so that's what we see, and we don't see all the nuances or the dimensions, or like, for example, what Aga was experiencing as a child with growing up with a single mom who sees that I can't provide for my children, so I'm going to move them. So I think it's just because we're very used to seeing our own culture perspective as the center of our scope of vision.
And also what's lacking is the historical perspective in that sense of how Europe has actually had intervention in Africa in terms of colonization, and also as part of the wars that are ongoing in the Middle East right now. Sweden has a weapons and arms industry that it's quite covert, so there's this idea that these countries are supportive and neutral, but you know, few people would want to admit that this is in fact a backlash that is happening. Aga, what's your perspective?
I see it also in when you look at the reasons why people leave the countries, you'd have to admit your responsibility within it. Germany is, I don't know, it's not, it's one of the biggest weapon industries, and and now, since some weeks now, we are also officially in war. So you don't want to admit it. You don't want to see it, the responsibility. There's a very cool guy whose name is Young and Naive, and he is going to the press, how do you say, press releases from the government for the press, and he's asking this naive questions, and he was asking this like, what's with the responsibility? And they don't, they rather say, we help because we are so good, we are good people, we don't look at the who's guilty because we have to help the people now. But it's so hypocritical.
It is hypocritical, absolutely, and this is something that also from our previous hangout with a person from Algeria, they recognize that the EU has actually intervened in the very politics of these countries that are now broken down. So how can they complain that they're getting this mass influx of refugees and immigrants without considering how they actually intervene in wrecking up the economies and politics of these countries? So very important to look at this. So thanks, Joku, for your question. We have another one from him, and he's saying, would you say that overall people fear the pressure on the infrastructure more than the idea of refugees, as in people are more concerned about the system not being able to handle the influx of people more than they are concerned about the mix of culture?
No, I think it's the mix of culture that they're more concerned about. I think it's more people, because I work directly in the system with the municipality, right? So I see very much the infrastructure part of it. I don't think that regular people who aren't involved with that see so much that aspect, because you don't see that being a problem. So it is so much more about the culture. I read on Facebook there was this lady that was being ridiculed because she stood in the supermarket and some refugee person had, or an immigrant or whatever, or just a person had bought up all the toilet paper, and she was like, that is just so disrespectful. Swedish people should come first. They should get the toilet paper first, and I was like, wow, so you want to create apartheid, like this. I think it's like a very deep-seated, like Aga was saying, a deep-seated fear of being, of your culture and your, even like your race being, how do you say, destroyed.
Yeah, it's actually that fear of losing their culture, which is actually motivating that fear, and therefore xenophobia, which is also part of the cultural shock that people are experiencing. And I've also seen like youngsters that say, well, what will happen to our culture with all of these people? And seeing them in the same frame in a documentary and things like that, there's this tension, and there's this like, not wanting to even look at them and things like that. So the thing that is actually missing, of course, is considering that they are human beings. Yeah. The only thing that's dividing us is just how people look, their attire, their race, the color of their skin, their language. Of course, these are barriers that have to be transcended, but I do see that it is important to consider that there's more of a mind barrier than the actual possibility to make things work. So, Aga, what's your perspective on this question?
This is actually something that I've experienced on myself, or that I experience within myself, where I don't identify myself so much with a nationality, and it's more complicated in my life because I married American. I was married with Americans, and I'm still spending much time in Morocco. So what I see is like people identify themselves so much with the country they come from, and for me it's like a clothing, and you can change your clothes. You are not your clothes. So yeah, I see the fear, people sticking to this things that are not really them. If you, it's just a coincidence that you are born in this country at this time, If you would be born in another country, you would think you are another being. This is, but this is tough, and I don't judge it. I understand it, because it's very tough to let go of things that you have identified yourself with. So sometimes when I look at or when I interact with Germans, I understand them, yeah, in a way.
It is definitely part of what we've been also conditioned to, well, also responding to your language, culture, flag, and whatnot. But in these kind of situations, I do see that as with every crisis, there is a potential to it, and to be able to expand and embrace people regardless of how they look like, and rather go to that very core point of we are all human beings. We are required to have our basic needs guaranteed. If I guarantee their well-being, I can ensure that they don't become a problem to my society in the end. So thanks, Joe, for your question. We have another one from Joanna, and she's saying, Anna, from your perspective working with refugees, what is their perspective upon arriving in Europe? Is it what they had in mind? What do they enjoy the most? And is it their plan to go back to Syria or the other places as soon as war ends, or stay in Europe?
Yeah, so I can kind of loop this back to what Aga was talking about, or we were talking about before, is that what I've come to see, which is of course common sense, is that every single person is different. Every single person has their, like Aga was saying, who they are, they bring that with them. And so one person may be dissatisfied. One person, I know a general point I can share is that they have often been duped, right? Because there are human traffickers, and they dupe them, and they tell them that, oh my God, Sweden is just this amazing place, and when you go there, everyone is so rich, and you get all this money, and and then you can bring your family, and it's just going to be wonderful. And when you've had that story, and you've been holding on to this as you've been traveling and walking, and these boys, they're 12 to 18 years old. They've been on these horrible, like 3-meter boats with like 70 people. They've shared with me their journeys to Greece, for example, and they hold on to this, I'm going to this utopia, and then they get here, and it's like flat and empty, and yeah, there is all the shops and all the money, but you can't have any. You can't be a part of it. You're not a part of it yet. And so that is like a common experience. But otherwise, I see that it very much is up to the individual person. Some people are more like, okay, let me see what opportunities are here. Others are more like whining, just like every other person. Like, right, if you took a group of British people or Americans, you would have this specter of personalities and people handling it in different ways. And what they enjoy the most about being here, I don't know. What's really funny is that they don't, for example, particularly enjoy the food, right? So you would think that, oh, because I had in the beginning this like, we're saving them, and then they were like, but we just want rice and vegetables, because that's what they've been brought up with. That's what they enjoy. That's what they know. And so they find our food to be weird and, not a lot of taste in it. And I think they enjoy, these are teenagers, so they enjoy playing PlayStation and shooting pool and exercising in the gym and putting on smelling cologne, just like any other teenage boy. That's what they enjoy. And do they want to go back? Well, I think again that's very individual. Some of them want to have for example, a wife from their country. Others really want like a Swedish girlfriend, and so they would want to stay. Some of them really want to stay. But I also think that the way that they see Syria or Afghanistan, for example, is that it's broken. It's, they have like they're completely disillusionized. They don't have this like, oh, and then we rebuild society. No, they see rumble and explosions and rockets and war, and they have flashbacks. So I don't think right now that this like idea of going back would more be, you know, a nightmare. Going back to constant terror, and for example, especially for Afghanistan, you know, that country has been in war like for so many years. Even before the Taliban, you had the Russians, and even before that. So it's like a very war-torn country, and so I don't know. Yeah.
Aga?
I don't think so. I have my own experience, and even if at the beginning, because everything is new to you, you think, you know, when it's possible, I will go back. The human is an animal. We say in Germany, what means you are used to do things, and if you get used to a life here in or where you are in Germany or in Sweden, after it's time. So after a period of 5 years or 10 years, it's becoming your home. Then I had a conversation with a Turkish woman. It was quite interesting because I was talking with her, and she said she came in the 70s, and she was always then thinking she will go back to Turkey. And after some years, she was then visiting her mother, and she realized that the country she was dreaming of didn't exist anymore. So it progresses. And then she realized that although she is not a German, and he will never be a German, Germany is her home.
Yeah, that's exactly it. I've also had a lot of these, what these people also experience is that they actually create like a double kind of personality or culture, because they never become fully a citizen of the new country, but they also, especially also the second generation that is born in the new country, but whose parents still identify with old country. It's like a whole new, it's like a hybrid thing.
It's like Chicanos in the US, you know, Mexican, half
Yeah,
American,
yeah,
and they mix the culture and the language, and they have
yeah.
their own type of grouping. So I guess that's how it's going to go. Ladies, I'd like to join into the conversation with regards to solutions and ways
Yeah.
forward. First of all, looking at, is there any notion coming from the governments right now? Like, for example, Anna, in the type of project that you're working on, what is the aim with it? Is there like a long-term solution? Is it being created as you go? And then we will go with Aga.
Well, I don't know. I cannot speak for the government officials, but the way that I perceive it, no, they are making it up as they go, because they can't do it any other way because it's happening so fast. So no, not that I know of.
Aga?
I personally, I don't see any solutions. So when I see the media, the news, it's for now it's just a little bit settled down, so that the infrastructure was growing, and now we are just like handling the situation uh, better than it was 3 months ago. But I don't see any outlook like where they even don't know how much people will still come. What is to expect next year? No one knows.
One important fact that you brought up is how in terms of there being a million people now to integrate into the German society, you were saying something that caught our attention in relation to the East and the West integration of Germany.
But
Can
this
you
was
share?
a false number, so I looked it up again. So in the year 89 and 90, when the wall fell, there was each year, this was a peak of the movement from east to west. There was 500,000 people moving from East Germany to West Germany in those years. So, and at this time, it's like comparable to the numbers that we now have. No one was speaking about the crisis because the Eastern are moving to West Germany. But I understand that the situation was a little bit different because you speak the language and you move because you have a new job or something like that. You have an outlook for something, for a job. So it's now a little bit different. But Germany is a master in help me with having immigrants coming to the country, and they have an infrastructure not laid out for such a number of people, but there are ways, and I'm quite sure that structurally it will work. But I don't know what will happen with the problems that will then come.
Well, there's obviously going to be a process of integration. There's going to be a process of building, and it will certainly be, of course, from my perspective, something good for their economies as well. So we've talked about that economic benefit in a way. But when we look at the mind barrier that we were considering in terms of the cultural shock, what kind of principles would you like people that are watching this hangout to consider, you know, people from Germany, Europe in general, to consider in relation to how to approach this situation? What would you say to them?
Well, if I can comment on that, one thing that I've noticed is that when we talk about integration, because that's a very hot topic, also the barrier between the people that don't want the immigrants and the people that do, is that, you know, we have to integrate them. They have to become a part of our culture. Like, that's the most important thing, right? But the problem is that we only do that through work, school programs. We only do that on a very systemic level, and that works quite well. You know, they do get into the system and they do get educated and stuff, but very few Swedish people, for example, invite immigrants into their home. They don't become friends. They don't talk to them. They don't. You know, for example, I had a Kurdish friend who was in her 60s, a beautiful, gorgeous woman. You know, she didn't have a scarf or anything. She'd lived here for over 25 years, and a fantastic, interesting woman. And she's never in her life had a Swedish friend. And she kept trying, and she really wanted to. And she went out and she did all these things, and she was like a normal, modern woman. But just because she was Kurdish, there was this barrier, and people were uncomfortable, and you know, she weren't able to make friends. And I think that is, and exactly what Aga said in the beginning, I've worked with people from all over the world, from Palestine, from Sudan, from Somalia, and when you get close to a person like that, and you work side by side, or you cook together, or you take a walk together, and you sit across a table and you look at each other in the eyes, that barrier disappears. It cannot not disappear. And I think that is a very important step. And I would say that even the governments, you know, it should happen more organized, because it's difficult for people to set that up by themselves. I would really want for organizations to come forth and create, and it shouldn't be, you know, just like meeting and sitting and having a coffee, because that can be quite pressure, but like cooking together, learning to cook different foods, you know, watching each other's children, like really, like that is for me real integration that needs to happen, is to meet each other as people, and especially also for the people that are afraid, because a lot of them, if you look at, for example, Denmark, the last election, the people that were the most negative towards immigrants were the areas without immigrants. Right? So the people that feared the immigrants the most were living in the countryside where there were no immigrants. So that just goes to show that that is why you fear it. You fear that which you don't know. As soon as you know it and you meet people, you realize that well, hey, they're like me. And everyone is different, and there are idiots and psychopaths in every culture. So we shouldn't stigmatize one group or the other for that. So that would be my message.
Awesome. I fully agree with that on losing the fear. Aga?
Yeah, I agree with Anna. So also when you look at Pegida, where it's most prominent, it's exactly in those regions where very little immigrants are. And I see also the necessity of more social programs. I'm not sure, like, because it has to be organized. You said, cooking together, but what I saw was a project with music. So people would just meet and make together music. And that was a really great project. And then you really spend time together, and you go beyond seeing a person as the nationality or the color of the hair, but you see, or you start to interact with the being. So you
Absolutely.
go beyond the surface.
Yes, it is really getting down to that core of we are human beings. And with this, we have a comment from Anton, which is related to this. He's saying, a comment, the refugee crisis is an outflow consequence of the sins of generations before us. Go back to 500 plus years, see how we manipulated, robbed, raped each other for resources, power, and dominance. The root fear of the outsider still feeds those. So we go back to the fear and rather looking at the responsibility and saying, well, there is a reason why we're here, and instead of continuing fighting them, let's rather find ways to integrate them, to get along, to get rid of this fear, to make the system work for this. And obviously, if it's possible to also intervene in the countries where most of these people are coming from to restore their economies, to stop the wars, of course, that's just common sense. But now that people are there, and because I don't think that they plan on going back sincerely, this is about a push for equality in all the sense, and really considering human rights, and really considering placing ourselves in the shoes of others. So ladies, any last words to finalize this hangout?
Yeah, then I would also say that it's not to take our culture for granted as being like the epitome of cultures, like we're just amazing and we should never change and we can't learn anything from them because they're just barbaric. I mean, the Afghans have some beautiful culture and they're extremely good at throwing parties. You know, we had a Christmas party at work and they were like, is this a party? Is this what you call a party? You know, people just sitting and eating, right? Because they're really good at throwing parties. And I know it's such a small thing, but I mean, you know, you say that we should go down to those countries and help them restore them, yes, but we shouldn't just try to mold them in our image, you know, and we shouldn't just look at ourselves as, you know, this amazing culture, but instead try and create a fusion that is actually best for everyone and that considers the heretics and the history of a culture.
Aga?
So I would say that it is a consequence, and no one was asking for it. Like, we didn't ask for it, and the refugees didn't ask for it. But the question is, what do we do with that consequence? Which way do we gonna choose? We can just make it more worse, or we can learn from it. And there is a way to make the best of it and to learn from it and change it so that something like this does not happen again. Prevent it in the future. We should move on the planet not because we are forced by war or poverty. We should move to explore ourselves and the planet. So yeah, it's about what are we going to do with it, and there are ways and there are options, and the living income proposal is one of the best things that could happen to that crisis.
Where there is a will, there is a way, and this applies to this situation, of course. We will last read Joanna's comment. Very cool, Anna and Aga. It is a very similar pattern to other migration waves in the world. In an aging European population, young migrants can definitely be a breath of fresh air and widen our horizons to the rest of the world, our common place, which is the world. Thanks, Joanna, for that. So we're going to finalize the Hangout now. Sorry, but we're running out of time. So please leave your comments in the video. If you guys have any last word, this is the moment. Otherwise, we will just finalize. Is that cool? You guys are done?
No, it's
no, we can keep going. We can keep going.
There are so many different aspects to be covered. Yeah. We could talk hours and hours.
Yeah.
Absolutely, though, maybe for a second version on some other specific topics, but for now I consider that, this is not a topic that has a straightforward solution, as we've been saying, but there's a lot of things that have been said already. So thanks a lot for being here.
Sure, thanks for having us.
Yes, thank you.
And to you, the viewer, if you have further questions, please place them in the YouTube comments. I will make sure that they get them so that you can comment back if you didn't get to the live transmission. And we will see you next time. Enjoy the last week of the year, and we will start another year with these Hangouts next week. Thank you, and until next time.
Bye.
Bye.